Surprised to see you. You used to really slag off all the globalists at the WEF.
Oh, I slagged off the European Parliament for 20 years, but I still went there once a month. And I think I genuinely upset them virtually every time I turned up. Isn't it interesting? I mean, 5 years ago, here at Davos, the main topic of conversation was climate change, DEI, all that baloney. And here we are, 5 years on, and the debate's completely different. It's being dominated by AI, tech, energy. And the one thing I've enjoyed over the last couple of days, there is genuine debate. That there are different opinions now, rather than the sort of consensus view that I certainly felt was coming out from the globalists. I found it really interesting and worthwhile.
Well, one consensus view, I mean, you and I talked about this, is sort of, it is quite funny that there's so many honest conversations this week, and it sort of suggests, what were the conversations like before, but we have had a lot of...
Well, I think, you see, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, 10 years ago, we had the Brexit referendum result, we had Trump winning the presidency, and I think everyone thought, well, these are just aberrations. These are short-term... I remember Tony Blair saying these are sort of short-term fits of rage, normal service will be resumed. And now everyone realises that actually these were the first tremors of a very, very major change in political conversation and debate. And that, I think, now is writ large.
Well, I want to get into, I think a lot of people are interested in how you're seeing kind of foreign policy, the UK's role in this new world that we've all been talking about this week. But just to get into sort of core Bloomberg territory for a few minutes, one of the consensus views out there, if you ask economists, many people in the city, what would happen to UK borrowing rates if a reform government took power, they go up. At least that's the consensus. So why do you think investors seem to be quite nervous about reform?
Yeah, well, as a former commodities trader, if there's a big consensual view, take the opposite trade position. I've always believed in that quite strongly. Look, I think one lesson, obviously we're talking about supply-side reform. One of the big frustrations is that since Brexit, businesses, particularly the small and medium-sized businesses, are now more heavily regulated, more penalised by HMRC and whichever regulator is relevant to their area than they were before Brexit. It's a massive frustration. So do we want to reduce the size of the administrative state? Yes. Do we want to attempt genuine supply-side reform? Absolutely. Do we want to cut taxes? Do we want rich taxpayers to flee the country and young entrepreneurs to flee the country every year or come back to the country, invest, employ people, spend money? So that's the agenda. And people say, well, if you do all of that, you're kind of going to be following a little bit of the quasi-Kwarteng budget, and the market's going to take fright. So that's where the view comes from. And I think the one big lesson from the Truss-Kwarteng budget is they did not propose to cut spending. They basically said, we won't increase spending in line with inflation. So for our programme to work, what we absolutely have to do is to say to people, we are going to reduce welfare spending. We are going to reduce excessive government waste. And I think if we do that, the markets will applaud it.
One of the big ways in your programme that you step back from some of the more sort of aggressive tax cut promises, said it's an aspiration, but one of the big savings in your plan currently is to get more money, to save money that the Bank of England currently spends on paying interest on bank reserves. So as you know, there's a lot of concern about that from the Bank of England. They think they're going to lose control over interest rates, which is a pretty core part of their monetary policy. And certainly bankers quite clearly see whether it's, I think you said 30 billion, 35 billion.
Yeah,
I think it's more like 20 billion. But that's a 20 billion tax on banks.
Yeah, look, that's less relevant now than it was because we're not going through the QE programme in quite the same way we were before, as you know. In fact, the opposite's been happening in some regards.
But that's where some of the savings come from, actually, is from the sales of the QT.
We were the only party to point out just how much this was costing. And I think that's what we're good at. What we're good at is introducing new debates. And it was very interesting. When I went to meet Richard Tyson, I went to meet the Governor of the Bank of England, which was a very interesting clash of cultures, I would say. And I just said it's really interesting that you're making massive decisions here that have a huge impact on public finances. And yet it's being done with no debate in Parliament whatsoever.
But that's not true. I mean, they have. It's not. It's true that there's no Reform MPs on the Select Committee, but they go all the time to give testimony to the House of Parliament.
Yeah.
The government controls
and these subjects
dictates these policies. Actually, part of these agreements are agreements with the Treasury of what they've been doing.
And these subjects don't get talked about properly. You know, there's no proper open debate, and frankly, the committee system in the UK doesn't get the coverage, doesn't get the publicity. We have not had any debate in the floor of the House of Commons on this subject at all.
But you say you're going to do it. It's a part of your plan. It's not just part of your plan to discuss it.
No, we're going to do it.
At least 20 billion.
We're going to do it.
You're going to tax the banks 20 billion.
And some of the banks won't like it. You're quite right.
They will all pass it on to their consumers.
Well, I don't like the banks very much because they debanked me, didn't they? And wouldn't give me an account and try to force me out of the country. No, look, this will be tough for banks to accept. I get that.
But how do you think they're going to pay the 20 billion?
I'm sorry, but the drain on public finances is just too great.
But how do they make their money? If they don't make it there, don't you think... it's pretty clear. It's going to go on to interest margin. It's going to go on to the mortgage costs and the interest rates they charge your voters. Or
they become more efficient, or they cut costs, or they do whatever. This money, they should not have had this money over... Look, frankly, the whole QE programme has not achieved anything very much, other than to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. And everything we've done on QE since George Osborne and co put it into place has been bad for most people in the country.
That's been really helpful because it's very clear. You're happy to have a very hefty extra tax on banks.
It's not a,
so sort of more anti-bank than this government. Is that true?
It's not a tax. They're just not going to get free money anymore.
It's taking £20 billion from the banks. It doesn't really matter how you
They'll adapt.
They'll
adjust. Business does.
Right. You disagree with the Bank of England governor on that. If we have an election on schedule, there'll be a new Bank of England governor by the time you would become Prime Minister. They'd come in early 28. One of the other things that people are worried about is that you're actually questioning one of these key pillars of UK economic policy, one of the few stable pillars in the last 15 years or so, 20 years.
Well, given
the independent Bank of England. Will you let that new Bank of England governor continue in their full term?
Well, given what a catastrophe UK economic policy has been over the last 15 years, I think we should challenge every single tenet of it. And I think one of the biggest mistakes, look, we vote Brexit. Now, if you vote Brexit, use it as an opportunity to do things differently. And the trouble is, from day one, the Conservative government viewed it as a damage limitation exercise, as opposed to an opportunity. And Andrew Bailey is a perfectly polite, nice man, but they should have picked somebody who was a Brexiteer to be in charge of the Bank of England and to think totally differently, especially around financial markets, financial market regulation. We've ignored this.
Like every other independent central bank, they think about their inflation target. So you're suggesting after Brexit they shouldn't have been focused on inflation target.
There's a crossover here with the FCA as well. Okay, there's a big crossover here with the FCA as well. Take the whole world of cryptocurrencies and crypto trading, and we are just lagging so far behind many other parts of the world, and yet the FCA don't want to know, frankly, the Bank of England don't want to know. There was even a proposal from Bailey just recently to restrict the number of stable coins any individual can hold. So you see, I'm talking about having people, the governor of the Bank of England, I'm not questioning the independence of it. What I am saying is that we need a new, more innovative approach to all of this.
Okay, but if you get rid of the one who's there, and there has been a tradition that reflects the independence of the central bank, that the terms don't necessarily coincide with election terms, you're saying you would suspend that because you'd want to have your own person in there?
If we don't do things differently, we're going to get poorer and
but
poorer.
But people want to know exactly how you're going to do things differently, not just say we're going to have a big debate and we're going to question all
We're going to pick different people with a different attitude towards everything to do with
including the
economic
inflation target.
Well, the inflation target, fine. We're not meeting it anyway. With what we're doing now, of course, inflation needs to be controlled. Of course, it needs to be controlled. And there are other debates too. The role of the OBR.
I was going to ask you about that.
When do they last get a forecast right about anything? What useful purpose do they serve?
That just means they're economists.
What useful? Well, I know they're nearly always wrong. Yeah, but what useful purpose do they serve? Look, we are prepared to think openly and challenge everything. Just as here at Davos, there is now an open debate, honest conversations, as you said earlier, no longer a consensual view. the way Britain's been run, let's say since 2008, we could go back earlier, the way it's been run isn't working, and we're having fresh thinking on all of it.
I'm sure a lot of people would think, great, but if you're about, fresh thinking, who can be against fresh thinking?
It's a good start.
But throwing
it's a very
everything,
good place to start.
Well, it's a good place to start in opposition. It's not a good place to start at number 10 Downing Street, that you're going to put everything in the air.
Really?
You've not promised to do anything in particular.
I tell you what, it worked pretty well in the early 1980s, didn't it? Where we had a radical government that changed everything about our tax structures, our laws, and yes, there were a couple of difficult years, but did it turn the economy around? Did it lead to a change of attitude in the country?
But that's really interesting. Yes. Margaret Thatcher was did not throw everything in the air. If you look at the 1979 manifesto, it didn't have any of the big ambitious things that Thatcher later did. And the first few years, she stuck to the plans that she'd had because she wanted to there was actually a certainty that was offered to the markets and to
Well, I would disagree with that completely.
She didn't just question everything and didn't just suddenly surprise everybody.
I disagree with that completely. The first budget that Geoffrey Howe brought in brought top-rate income tax down from 83% to 60%. I'd call that pretty radical.
But there was still some of the core elements of her policy, things like the really dramatic stuff, all came afterwards, after she'd built up support and after they'd got inflation out, which she did say she would stop.
She gave a very clear signal that the country was heading in a different direction. And did it take a long time to get all the trade union laws through and all the rest of it? Yes, it did. You can't change things overnight, but you can signal that you want to go in a different direction. And look, I just think, Stephen, I just think the most ignored section of the British economy, the one where we're failing in the biggest way, are the 5.6 million men and women out there running their own businesses, and they feel put upon. I mean, for example, HMRC now want them to do quarterly returns as opposed to annual returns. It's just one little example of how we punish small business again and again and again. And I genuinely believe, that if you look at what happened economically in America and in Britain in the 80s, you'll see a lot of that growth actually came from the bottom up in the economy, not from the top down. So I want a complete rethink over all that.
I think a lot of people would hear you on those sort of what we would say, microeconomic things that are going wrong. You say, I'm going to change these micro things. But if you're putting the whole system of the way that macroeconomic policy has been run in the country, particularly the independent fiscal watchdog, independent central bank, if that is in question when you walk into number 10, you don't think there's going to be an enormous amount of concern in international markets that will affect your ability to pay your debt?
Well, maybe people will think, finally, we've got a government that actually has within it people who've been in business, because we haven't got that now, and we haven't had much of it for many years.
It doesn't sound like you're very worried about having a repeat of a sort of Liz Truss type.
No, because we're going to cut spending. For example, you can now get benefits if you suffer from mild anxiety. Well, I have mild anxiety every morning. We've just reached a ridiculous level with all of this, and it can't go on. It just can't go on. We're looking at a benefits bill of 300 billion by 2030, something like that. So it can't go on. And look, of course, I'm there to challenge all of these things. And what I will do over the course of this year, bear in mind, I've only been back in politics 18 months. I escaped, I got out over the wall, but I'm back again. I've had 18 months to try and build a political party, a structure from nothing. So effectively, I'm the CEO of Reform, and we build departments, and they give their weekly or daily reports into me, and we're growing. The next big stage of my development will be that this time next year, sitting here on the Bloomberg panel with you, won't be me, because there will be a team of people appointed to take all of those jobs. And that is the next big stage of the development. So, perhaps the criticism that could be levelled fairly against me, there were lots levelled unfairly against me, but the fairly against me is that, I've never been in frontline government, true, and it's a one-man band. So at the minute, I'm asked to talk about economic policy, foreign policy, law and order, borders, everything. And so it's now about broadening the team, putting different people in position, and then formulating firmer policies than we have. But we have laid out already some proposed bills, economic bills, you know, the concept of the Britannia card to try and bring high taxpayers back to Britain, the digital markets, digital assets and crypto bill. So I think we are showing a way forward.
One other, we'll get onto the foreign policy in a minute, but there were just a couple of other domestic things. I mean, obviously, along with the welfare bill, and a big part of the increase in that half of spending is the triple lock. And you've suggested that would be up for discussion. Do you think it's affordable to continue that?
Everything's up for discussion. I mean, I think my main target in terms of cuts is excessive welfare spending. I get the logic of the argument over triple lock. It's something we'll come to over time.
The argument that it's too expensive.
The argument that it's too dear.
And also the generational issues.
Yeah, well, you can't blame young people for being pretty cheesed off in Britain because they can't even aspire to have the things their parents had or their grandparents had, and that is a real problem. And you know, one of the huge problems here, of course, is the lunacy of saying we want to send 50% to university. Something that Blair introduced, supported by the lapdog Tories. And now we have, you know, loads of kids who've been disadvantaged by going to university, and others who are now paying marginal tax rates because of the extra 9% on everything they're earning. I mean, it's virtually usury, frankly, the way it's been done, forcing them abroad. And that's one of the areas with young people that really is making young people unhappy. It's also leading, and by the way, I'm not against university, I'm just against university for 50%. And a lot of those very bright graduates that come out of university that could be a huge economic benefit to Britain, just look at their tax bill after the first year and decide I'm going to go and live somewhere else in the world. So all of those things we've got to think about too.
You've got a lot of people in local government. I mean, one of the areas that certainly economists think probably doesn't work very well is council tax, and you've now got reform running around a dozen local governments. Is that something that, I mean, they all wanted to cut council tax. Lots of them are having to increase.
No, not true.
Several of them said that, committed
not
to it.
True. No, it's not true. Urban myth. I spent the whole of April travelling around the country. I never once promised we could cut council tax.
They weren't voting for you. They were voting for these councillors who did say they would cut it.
Well, you can believe that if you want to.
Well, they're the ones who are now stuck running it, having made these promises.
I think you'll find increasingly in British politics, at all levels of election, people either vote for or against the leaders of the main parties. We've sort of almost got a quasi-presidential system. Here's the point. We campaigned saying local government had serious debt issues and that we would trim expenditure. And we have already cut hundreds of millions of pounds of spending. But the debt burden around the necks is huge. If you look at our council tax increases, by the way, they're lower than the other areas run by the other parties.
Quite a few of them are the maximum amount. But anyway, I suspect
they
this
are lower.
This audience...
No, I'm going to repeat.
I care about council tax.
I'm sorry, the reform council tax rises taken across the 12 are lower...
Over average, yeah.
Over the average than the other parties.
So you mentioned Brexit. You mentioned that we should have made more of an opportunity out of Brexit.
We should have done it immediately.
We've talked about the end of, that globalism has certainly, changed, and we are seeing a new kind of global order. I haven't heard you say, what is Britain's role in this new global order? How do you see, when you think the debates this week, how do you think about your foreign policy?
Number one, we have amazing advantages. Being outside of the European Union leaves us free in terms of trade policy. Ironically, the super Remainer Starmer boasts at the dispatch box now about the fact we've got an independent trade policy and we're able to do things. And I think in terms of being a bridge between Europe and America, we're in a powerful position. I just think we've underutilised the amazing advantages we have across the rest of the world. We turned our backs on India, we turned our backs on the Commonwealth countries in the 70s. We decided that Europe was our future. That became the sort of foreign office and political priority over decades. And we've turned our backs on large parts of the world where there is still a remarkable relationship between those former colonies and ourselves. So we need to think more globally in every way.
Prime Minister's I mean, China's the obvious country that there's been a big debate about. Prime Minister's going to visit. I think it's the first prime ministerial visit for the UK in 8 years. Would you go to China? How would you think about the relationship with China?
Well, I don't believe our relationship with China is very good. I think this government is utterly craven in the way that it gives into China at every opportunity. It's a difficult problem because they've become so big, and to some extent we've become quite dependent upon them, and not the other way around if you think it through. So it's a massive, massive problem. But it's not a relationship we should trust, and we should be extremely cautious of them.
But what does that, I mean, if you're Prime Minister, what does that mean?
It means you don't allow them to build an embassy on the site of the historic Royal Mint, which could potentially threaten communications. I mean, I just can't believe it. I think Isaac Newton would be turning in his grave.
So there is, I like the fact that you know Isaac Newton used to be the keeper of the Royal Mint.
You'd be surprised why I know, honestly.
If you have that kind of attitude to China, and you certainly have your great relationship with President Trump, it does sound like you'd be sort of saying, as you go into number 10, we are going to be absolutely, inextricably tied with the US. There is no plan B.
I'm not saying that, but I do think America. Look, what's our growth rate going to be Q4? What's it going to be? 0.2%? If it's 0.3%, Rachel Reeves will be cheering. She might even smile, you never know. And what's America's growth rate going to be? 5%? 5.2%? 5.4%? There's a lot we can learn from America, attitudes toward business, and particularly embracing new technology. We literally have front benches in Parliament, both sides, full of people who have no comprehension of what this world is. And that's why I've said one thing that I will do is I want to bring people into government from outside the political sphere who are genuine experts in their area, who will take on a job at personal cost to them for 4 or 5 years to put something back. So there's so much we can learn about American business, about tech. But of course, we can't do any of it if we go on with our moronic energy policy. Utterly moronic. Started, well, actually, it was the Tories, of course, that wrote this net zero legislation into law, and we've turned our backs on gas production, we've turned our backs on oil production. This was a consensus of both parties, both with the same attitude, and here we are with industrial energy prices 4 times that of America. It's insane.
Going back to the relationship with the US, I mean, you talked about the dangers of being dependent on China. We are utterly dependent on the US for many, many things, including obviously very deep level at our defence.
Yes.
It seems, and you're talking about closer economic ties. A lot of people this week have really questioned whether this president is a reliable partner.
Okay, I did not talk about closer economic ties. I talked about learning from what the Americans have done, because they're getting it right and we're getting it wrong in terms of economics.
So who are we going to have closer ties with under a reform government? Not China, that would be worse.
Certainly not China.
Not the US.
We've got to think more in terms of the English-speaking world, and yes, that does include America. Of course it does. But to have a close relationship doesn't mean being beholden. You know, friends will disagree from time to time. I will disagree with things Trump says, of course, you know, from time to time.
With this president, it seems that doing what you've just said, having a good relationship without being beholden.
Yeah.
I think we even learnt from Mark Carney this week, or at least his argument was, means actually working with a lot of other countries. And European countries have deduced from this week and from the change in the position on Greenland that ganging together was the only way to be not beholden to Donald Trump. You don't want to do that.
Good old Mark Carney, isn't he marvellous?
But you don't think you should be working with other European countries?
Chap that gets everything wrong.
Not be beholden to the US?
Gets everything wrong and keeps being promoted. It's remarkable. Look, of course, we understand collective strength through NATO and organisations like that. All right, I get that. But let's face it, the globalist idea that we should all do the same thing, have the same regulations, have the same targets, and the EU, of course, is the epicentre of all of this for the globalists. That's now for the birds. There's a change of debate. There is now something called national interest. And that's the new politics that you're seeing. That's the new approach that you're seeing.
I think a lot of people in this audience would say the conclusion from this week was not that, was that countries cannot go it alone, especially in their relationship with President Trump. They need to group together. And a lot of people in the UK will be thinking, in fact, we know from the polls that they want to be closer to Europe. But you're saying the opposite. You don't want to work with other countries, and especially not with Europe.
I'm very happy to work with other countries. I love Europe. I love Europeans. I just don't like Brussels and the terrible autocratic structures that it's built. I don't believe it's brought any benefits whatsoever. It may have been good for one or two big companies, but beyond that, it's been a failure, not a success.
It's been a little bit hard from this conversation to see where the direction would be
An independent
UK foreign policy.
But this is the point.
Actually do?
An independent United Kingdom chooses its own future, chooses its own relationships, makes its own decisions. We're doing it in trade policy. Trade policy is one example of what you can do if you're not part of a structure that tells you what you can and can't do. And that's what the EU was, and that's what the Brexit world's about. Making our own choices, making our own decisions. And yes, of course, in terms of defence, NATO is crucial, America is crucial. But you ask yourself a question. Has Donald Trump made NATO weaker or stronger over the last 10 years? And I would argue he's made NATO a lot stronger by waking Europeans up to the fact they couldn't go on having a free lunch.
We're going to run out of time, but given that this week has been so dominated by tech, I couldn't help noticing this week you had to apologise for breaching the code of conduct for failing to declare a load of income to the parliamentary committee. But your explanation was, I'm an oddball and I don't do computers. Do you think that's going to have to change if you become Prime Minister?
I'm in a fortunate position. I get staff to do it all for me.
But that is, you're still clearing of computers if you go to number 10.
I spend my time meeting people. I could spend my time on a screen all day. I choose not to.
Well, that is an interesting view around here with everyone talking about it.
That's what I do.
Will you come back?
Don't forget, I'm an old commodities trader, and I spend my life travelling, meeting people, and having the honour of being on Bloomberg platforms with people like you.
That is such a sort of cheesy way to end it. Thank you so much, Nigel Farage.